Okay, 5th grade, best grade, let's try this again. My first video had no sound because my microphone was set to default instead of my microphone. I guess it updated. So today we're talking about the Greek city-states, and you'll be taking notes on the polis. Okay, so for nitrogen, iodine, bromine, and chloramine, you will be taking the Greek geography do now before you take these notes. If you haven't taken it yet, go ahead and do that now and then come back to this video. This do now is based on all of the work we did last week. So you can go back and look at the things we did for week 215. Florine, you will be taking the Polis do now as an exit ticket to this assignment because you are doing this assignment on Wednesday. You already did the geography do now on Tuesday during our live class. And as a reminder, Tuesday is our live class this week. Educational goals. After today's lesson, my scholars should be able to answer questions about Greek city-states. We are building our understanding of ancient Greek society and construction. There are 2 methods for getting credit in this assignment. One is to fill out the guided notes document with the words marked in green. The other is to take notes on paper and submit a picture of your handwritten notes. Remember, the idea is not to write down every word when you try to take your notes by hand. You want to write down the main ideas and important details. Polis. A polis, plural polis, was the typical structure of a community in the ancient Greek world. A polis consisted of an urban center, often fortified, and had a sacred center built on a natural acropolis or a harbor, which controlled the surrounding territory of land. The term polis has, therefore, been translated as city-state, as there was typically only one city, and because an individual polis was independent from the other polis in terms of political, judicial, legal, religious, and social institutions and practices. Each polis was, in effect, a state. So they had different governments, political, they had different laws for judicial and legal. They sometimes had different gods or different gods that were more important to them. And they treated people differently. Their social institutions were different. So they were very different areas. They were almost like different countries, even though they all spoke the same language. Polis beginnings. The polis emerged from the Dark Ages, which followed the fall of the Mycenaean civilization in Greece, and by the 8th century BCE, a significant process of urbanization had begun. Urbanization is when people go from living out in their farms and start to converge together and live in a city, live closer together. There were eventually over 1,000 polis out in the Greek world, but among the most important were Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, and Argos. The biggest was Sparta, although with some 8,500 kilometers squared of territory, this was exceptionally large, and most polis were small in size. However, polis such as Athens possessed significant naval fleets, so those are boats, which also allowed them to control wide areas of territory across the Aegean. I keep hitting things with my hands. I need to stop talking like this. It's hard. Common features. Although individual polis each had their own particular identity and practices differed widely and even evolved over time, there were several common features. 1. Most of the population of a polis lived in the city, rather being spread across small farm communities in the surrounding territory. And the heart of the urban area was usually a sacred space with one or more temples. From the 8th century BCE, these were almost always the most impressive buildings in the polis. What do you think it means if their temples are the most impressive buildings where they live? That's right. It's because that their religion is super important to them. So the buildings that you make the most impressive are to kind of show what's most important to you as a people. I did not want to go over there yet. I wanted to lift my face around. There we go. Where were we? Okay. From the 7th century BCE, the city was usually fortified with a city wall, Sparta being a notable exception. They didn't have city wall. And the agora space was created for civic and commercial activity. From the 5th century BCE, many polis displayed evidence of town planning, with specific areas of the city designated for private, public, and religious functions. That means the buildings weren't just, built as they come. Somebody actually plotted out, here's where we want our homes to be, here's where we want our shops to be. They were intentioned creations. Many polis also had a designated space for public assembly, either for political purposes or also for entertainment. For example, a theater and a gymnasium. Political and economic power. These are our P&E grapes. A fundamental idea common to most polis was that all male citizens had equal political rights based on ownership of property. So that means all men had equal rights if they could afford to own property. In practice, whatever the political system adopted, tyranny, where you have only one ruler, oligarchy, where you have a sort of a group that is a ruler, democracy, where each person's vote is supposed to count. Political power was dominated by a few aristocratic families who held for themselves all the important positions in the polis, such as membership of elite councils and the higher military ranks. Also, within these citizen bodies, there were richer and poorer citizens. Over time, and especially following the introduction of money, the richer class, whose status had once been based on land ownership, began to accumulate wealth from investments and loans that they made, in effect increasing the difference between rich and poor. So being rich at one point meant, I own all these farms, and I'm making all of this food, and that's making money. And it turns into, well, yeah, I use my money to make money. A unique identity. Apart from male citizens, the social groups which make up Greek society also included women, children, slaves, freed slaves, laborers, and foreigners. These could make up as much as 90% of the total polis population, and so had to be included and involved in the polis in one way or another if it was to function as a cohesive community. One way of doing this was to create a social identity which differentiated a polis from all others. This identity was achieved in various ways, such as the creation of a communal space where people could mix and socialize, which they called the agora. Another was the practicing of polis-specific festivals and celebrations on specific dates in the year, usually of a religious nature, which also reinforced the idea that the polis had a unique, often mythical, founder and patron deity. When it comes to the founding of Athens, they actually have a story where it's Athena and Poseidon both want to be the patron deity of Athens. Poseidon gives the Athenians access to water, and creates a frothing, foaming stream spring that comes out, whereas Athena plants a single tree, as an olive tree, and tells them they're going to have to wait and see what it grows. Well, given some time to think about it, they noticed that the spring that Poseidon gave them was salt water. They couldn't even drink it. It was not useful for them. Whereas Athena's olive tree grew and created olives, which created olive oil, which was a source of wealth for them and something that could feed them. So it was ultimately more valuable. And so they decided to go with Athena as being their patron deity. Now, even if you notice, if you think about it, schools do this too. By having school mascots and school colors, and school things you say, like shine like the stars, red giants, we're trying to create in our school our own unique identity and personality that you guys can kind of cling to even while you're going through all of the other school things. And we have our own festivals. We have our award ceremonies. We have our competitions and sports games and trivia nights and our culture community. And all of these things are things that we do together as a school to create community and personality. Other more practical indicators of the polis as a separate unit were boundary markers, written law codes, coinage, using specific imagery related to the polis's history. For example, the owl on Athenian coins representing Athena, the city's patron. Wars, where soldiers fought a common enemy, often to settle disputed territorial claims as to who owns what land. And the production of a distinctive goods, for example, Corinthian pottery. A common community history or civic memory was reinforced and commemorated in public statues of local gods, leaders, benefactors, and sporting champions. For example, you might say one of our civic memories is Mr. Snorgels. So if we had a Mr. Snorgels statue, that might be important to us. Or if we made a statue of Mr. Marcus, I think that would be a great addition to the Basis DC campus. Pan-Hellenism. So pan means all, and Hellenism comes from the Hellas, and that means like all Greece. So this is like something that connects all of the different disparate city-states of Greece. So although polis were then each a unique cultural and political unit, the common features mentioned above and other factors such as language and broader religious beliefs meant that there were some feelings of connection between the polis. Like-minded polis often made political alliances for mutual protection, and examples include the Delian and Peloponnesian leagues, which we're going to talk about more when we talk about war. A wider Hellenic attitude between the polis was manifested in two particular instances: wars against non-Greek enemies, like the Persian Wars of the 5th century BCE, and pan-Hellenic festivals, such as the Olympic Games, held at Olympia every 4 years. And, that's a sport contest that has continued beyond ancient Greece. Many polis participated in these events and sought to advertise their successes in them by erecting commemorative trophies and monuments at sites such as Olympia and Delphi, where all Greeks would see them for centuries after. The future of the polis. In the late 4th century BCE, Alexander the Great and his successors spread the idea of the polis throughout the Macedonian Empire in Asia, typically with resettled Greeks acting as the ruling elite and the local population becoming subject farmers. In the Roman period, the polis continued as a functioning unit but was subordinate to a wider imperial apparatus of Roman-defied provinces. Polis therefore became less significant in terms of independent political power, but continued to be significant as providers of civic pride based on fine public buildings and the cultivation of the arts and sciences. So even when we get to a place where Greece is conquered and run by one person or a group of people, the individual personalities of the polis still exist. And that concludes our notes on the polis. Now, Florine, this is when you would go take your exit ticket for your polis due now. And for everyone else, this should be the end of class. Make sure that you turn in your notes. Either snap a copy of those handwritten notes or just make sure you've saved your Word document notes into the assignment so that I can give you your completion credit. Have a great day.